If you have the two fluids flowing in the same direction, what's going to happen is that at some point along the length of that gill, we will stop having diffusion because the two fluids have equilibrated with each other. If we have a countercurrent system, so I got water there, blood flowing in that direction. So as my blood comes in, my water comes in very high, loses, loses, loses. Because we have a countercurrent flow, we're able to extract more of the oxygen from the water. We continue to have a gradient that favors diffusion of oxygen from the water into the bloodstream, all across that lamella. They do not equilibrate at that intermediate level. So that's the benefit of a countercurrent system. It promotes that diffusion all the way across the lamellae. We do not get equilibration occurring. Oh, there's another way you could look at it. If we look at, make a graph, percent saturation of the fluid with oxygen, and that's distance across the lamellae. If we have a countercurrent system, that's not an arrow, it's just a line. The water would look like that, and the blood then is going to look like this. That's without the countercurrent system. So the two are flowing in the same direction, and they eventually equilibrate. Their percent saturation ends up approximately the same. If we draw the same thing for with a countercurrent system, it would look something like this. All right, with the water flowing opposite that of blood. Illustrating the same point is that all along we have a gradient that favors the diffusion of oxygen from the water into the blood. So that's just a graphical way of looking at what I put up here with the numbers. Same concept. Okay. All right, so by having this countercurrent flow, we can extract more oxygen. That's important because it's taking us a lot of energy to move the water, and there's not that much oxygen in there to begin with. In order for this to work, though, we have to keep that water flowing across the gills unidirectionally. It has to keep flowing across it in one direction, which is opposite to how the blood is flowing. So how do the little itty-bitty guys do it? We're going to use, I want to say, it's a small little diagram. Handout 16. Warming up. In order to accomplish this unidirectional flow of the water, fish use what's called a double pump system. I'll show you that first. You can look at this diagram. It's very similar to what I was attempting to draw on the board, but it's showing you the opercular gill with the branched rays, and then you can see the gill lamellae on top, And then what they're illustrating over here is the idea that the water is flowing in one direction, but you can see in the middle there the blood is flowing in a different direction. It's this diagram at the top that we'll use to illustrate what's going on, how the fish is managing to get the water over the gills, and more importantly, keep it essentially flowing in one direction. Okay, they have two pumps. One that is mostly the mouth area is called the buccal pump. It is a positive pressure pump. The other one is the opercular pump. It is a negative or suction pump. So in the fish, oh, you're kidding me, I didn't bring that. So the buccal is in the front, the opercular is in the back around the gills. We have a number of steps here, A, B, C, D. B and D are really short transitory steps. It's A and C that are really the important ones. Okay, we have two pumps, but we also have two valves. One's called the oral valve, and the other one's called the opercular valve. So if you take one of these bony fishes and look at the edge of the operculum, you'll see that it is a fleshy flap right at the end. So the bulk of the operculum is bony, but that outer edge is a flexible flap. All right? It's going to act as a gasket to close that opercular cavity. And in the front, we're calling it an oral valve, but essentially the animal is just clamping his mouth shut. Water is going to come in through the oral valve. It's going to leave through the opercular valve. All right, so note what's going on right here in step A. Here our buccal cavity is being refilled. How is it being refilled? The animal's expanding that area. Right? It's expanding outwards the bones that form the sides of the face underneath the mouth. Right? So it's making that cavity larger. As it makes that cavity larger, it creates negative pressure compared to the outside. That will draw water into the cavity. But note what's occurring with the opercular cavity. They're showing you a little bulge there at the side with that opercular valve. That's because at the same time, what's going on is that the opercular cavity is expanding as well. So it's starting to make that region larger. That creates negative pressure that sucks water from the buccal cavity across the gills here in the middle and into the opercular cavity. Right, so we're sucking water across the gills with a negative pressure opercular pump or suction pump. Right, then we have a short transitory phase right here. We've closed our oral valve and we're starting to compress that buccal cavity, make it smaller. We expanded it earlier, now we're going back and collapsing it. So that's creating positive pressure. My opercular valve is closed, but it's still somewhat expanded. So the difference in pressures is that pressure's higher in the buccal, lower in the opercular. The positive pressure, see the piston coming up, the positive pressure as that buccal cavity collapses starts forcing water over the gills and into the opercular cavity. In C, we've really got our pressure pump going. Our buccal cavity is really collapsing. And at the same time, we've opened our opercular valve. So as we push on that piston, the pressure pump creates high pressure in the buccal cavity, which forces water across the gills into the opercular cavity, out through the opercular flap, the opercular valve. And then this is just a short transitory stage that we're going to get back to what's happening in A again. So what you're doing is using these two pumps to maintain the directionality of the water flowing over the gills. We have a positive pressure pump, negative suction pump. So when we have water with the mouth open coming into the buccal cavity, we're increasing our negative pressure in the opercular cavity. We're expanding that opercular cavity. That then draws water across the gills by negative pressure. The other important one is here then, when we close that oral valve and decrease the size of the buccal cavity, we start creating large amounts of positive pressure that forces the water over into the opercular cavity. In other words, it forces the water over the gills by positive pressure, and then out, of course, through the opercular flap. So we're alternating the use of the negative pump and the positive pump and the opening and closing of the valves to maintain that unidirectional flow over the gills. Does that make sense? All right. Not all fish at all times will use this method, the double pump system. Right? Most of them will, most of the time. Well, just think of the last time you just watched a goldfish in a bowl, and it's bloop, bloop, bloop. Okay, that's what it's doing. It's alternating positive and negative pressures in order to draw water in through the mouth and out the opercular valve. But there is another way in which we can ventilate the gills. Right? There's another way in which we can get unidirectional flow of water over the gills, and that's called ram ventilation. This is true of a fair number of fishes in the open water that swim continually. So things like many sharks, scombrids. Who are scombrids? Tuna, mackerel, things like that. Water flow is across the gills because of movement of the body, not the operation of the double pump, but because the animal is swimming. It's swimming with its mouth open. Its mouth is open, the opercular valve is open. So as it moves forward through the water, water passes into the mouth and across the gills and out the opercular valve. This is a good technique, but it's only good if you swim fast enough. At slow speeds, the amount of energy needed to overcome the increased drag is too great. Why increased drag? Think about it. You have that nice streamlined shape on a fish. Now all of a sudden you're opening up its mouth and you're sticking out the operculum a little bit into the water. That's going to greatly increase the amount of drag on the fish. So we could graph it something like this. If we look at energy versus velocity, the energy required to use our double pump system might go up like this. So the energy required in order to operate our double pump system. As you swim faster, it's going to take more energy to operate it because you're going faster, you need more oxygen, therefore you're breathing harder. But if we look at ram ventilation, it will look something like this. I should have had that should be slanted more. Something like that. So that at your slow speeds, the amount of energy required in order to obtain your oxygen through ram ventilation is greater than the amount of energy that is used when you're operating your double pump system.